Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We'd like to thank you for having Team Socrates here today to talk to you, the Board of Directors for Tim Hortons, about crisis management. We wish we could have been here under better circumstances, and I will apologize in advance for having to present in front of you with the paper in my hand, but we only found out about this crisis 2 hours ago, and we've been preparing ever since. So without further ado, I'm going to move right into our recommendation for the current crisis situation, and that is that Tim Hortons must accept immediate responsibility for the situation by being completely transparent with all of their stakeholders. In terms of implementation, the considerations that Tim Hortons needs to look at are operational considerations, legal considerations, administrative considerations, and communication considerations. In terms of Tim Hortons' growth strategy for both the Canadian market and the United States, unfortunately, we believe this growth strategy will have to be postponed for at least a year before it can be commenced again. Now, just very briefly, we'll guide you through our agenda for the next 14 minutes. So firstly, we'll look at a little bit about Tim Hortons' company situation. We'll do a quick SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Then we'll look at some of the key issues that are affecting this current crisis situation. We'll follow that up by looking at 3 alternatives that we believe Tim Hortons has, and then provide you with a recommendation. Then we'll look at how that recommendation can be implemented, and we'll follow that up with how it will affect your finances, and then your plans for growth in the future. So just moving on now to the next slide, a little bit briefly about Tim Hortons. It has a 45-year history of success in Canada. It is now the 4th largest publicly traded quick service restaurant in North America, the largest in Canada. So there's a lot to be proud of. From 2004 to 2008, the company boasted 5-year compound annual growth in revenues and in operating income of 11.8 and 10.8% respectively, again, which is an incredible feat. Unfortunately, as of today, we found out that there was a crisis situation with a contaminated supply of coffee beans from a major supplier. It's been discovered in Tim Hortons' supply chain, and there's been substantial negative media coverage as a result. So now moving into a quick SWOT analysis, the strengths and weaknesses that are particularly relevant in this situation is amazingly strong brand recognition for Tim Hortons within Canada is a significant strength, as well as outstanding customer loyalty, which may help you weather this storm. In terms of weaknesses, Tim Hortons is currently reliant on a very small number of major suppliers, and that'll be an issue in controlling supply throughout this crisis management. In terms of opportunities, despite the crisis, we believe there's significant room for growth in both Canada and the United States. And in terms of threats, well, right now the primary worry is the loss of brand equity as a result of the contamination crisis. So we've identified several key issues that need to be considered in the crisis situation that's facing Tim Hortons right now. The first of which is administrative considerations. How are you going to set up a team that's going to deal with this crisis? Then moving into communications. How are you going to communicate with the various stakeholders that are involved? Operations. What are going to happen to your stores as a result of the contamination, and how are you going to deal with suppliers? Legal considerations. Will you have to worry about lawsuits? What is the best way to deal with that? Would you consider a lawsuit against the supplier who may be implicated in the contamination? And then finally, post-crisis management follow-up. So what will happen once the crisis has been averted? What plans can you make for the future? So these are the key issues that we've identified. And any action that relates to these key issues, the objective of which should be still to increase shareholder value while upholding Tim Hortons' core values. So at this point, I'm going to turn the floor over to my colleague Pooja, and she's going to talk a little bit about your options in this current crisis situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. So there's 3 alternatives available to Tim Hortons to handle this crisis situation. First, there is the wait and see method. So the wait and see method would be to just do nothing, assess the damage, and decide later what to do. The second strategy would be to play the blame game. So basically, publicly call out your supplier that it was really their fault and it is not Tim Hortons' fault. And finally, the last decision would be to accept responsibility, publicly admit that the contamination happened. When we took the time to assess the strategies that would be best for Tim Hortons, we realized that there was really only one dimension on which to assess the strategy. And that one dimension is commitment to your community. And so, as you can see, the wait-and-see strategy and the play-the-blame game are not positive for the community. And so there is really only one decision, and that is to accept responsibility. When it comes to a Tim Hortons customers' security, Tim Hortons has the utmost responsibility, and it's the first and only priority is their security. So there's 3 actions that must be taken right away. One is to assemble a crisis management team. 2, to keep a diary of all the events that happened and the actions that were taken. 3, to gather all the facts and assess how serious the problem is. There's also 2 very important considerations to be made. Tim Hortons should consider whether they should pull any TV ads. And secondly, Tim Hortons' commitment to the community, because of their commitment to the community, they should really consider whether they should advise competitors and other trade associations of the contamination that occurred. And so there's several steps that need to be taken in terms of operations. First of all, the restaurant operations, we need to verify where the contamination is. We should shut down all Tim Hortons corporate and franchise restaurants to verify if there was a contamination. We should also process to complete restaurant disinfection. And once assured that the restaurants are clean, then we can reopen them. In terms of the producers, we need to shut down all coffee roasting plants to ensure that there isn't any contamination there. We should also begin an inquiry as to why the crisis even occurred. As for the immediate supply, we need to verify whether our other suppliers have a contamination as well. And we should reopen non-infected centers and start rerouting the coffee. And finally, the long-term supply needs to be addressed as well. And so we should work with our suppliers in order to repair the issue, make sure that this issue just never happens again. So I'll pass it now to Dana.
Thank you very much, Pooja. I'm going to talk to you about the communications plan that Tim Hortons is going to have to develop in order to deal with this particular situation. So the first step that we took in looking at developing a communications plan was to actually do a stakeholder analysis. So above on the slide, you can see the major categories of the stakeholders that are potentially impacted by this particular situation. And while we understand that they're not mutually exclusive, we do believe that they do have distinct communication needs. So as you can see, the shaded areas are the ones, the particular stakeholders that we feel are perhaps particularly affected by the situation. So we would place perhaps priority in terms of communicating with them. We do have several innovative ideas in dealing with the situation, considering what times we live in. So in particular, in dealing with the public, we would want to set up hotline for telephone. We also would want to assemble an internet team to respond to concerns on forums or just newspapers and so on and so forth. Secondly, we of course have the employees and the franchisees that need to be reassured. Franchisees in particular might be financially affected, so administration at Tim Hortons is going to have to assess whether there are any steps that could be taken, perhaps by reducing their franchisee fees over the future. In terms of legal considerations, well, it really comes in several categories, but mostly it's a question of research and of preparation. In terms of research, we want to assess whether we're going to be liable or possibly held liable for this particular situation, both by actual people or also by like the government in terms of a regulatory environment. We also want to assess whether we could possibly put some of the blame on the suppliers, so to speak, to see if there are any damages that we could recover from them. And clearly, we also want to research the possibility as to whether there are any health professionals out there who could speak to what the effects of this particular contamination would be. In terms of post-crisis follow-up, we believe that it has to start internally. So if Tim Hortons is affected by any type of situation like this in the future, we clearly do not want to be caught unprepared. So therefore, we're going to develop steps such as a crisis response team. So that would be in terms of communication template, perhaps, for future situations, and a list of key persons who would be perhaps accountable for particular responsibilities in dealing with the crisis. Secondly, we would want to work with suppliers to ensure that further contaminations issues are not going to take place. And lastly, we do want to resume growth strategies moving forward. And with that, I'll pass it on to Max, who will address the financial impact.
Thank you, Dana. Before addressing the financial impact, already things are going pretty bad. During a time of crisis, things can go even more bad. So first, crisis, be unable to isolate the source of the contamination. Obviously, Tim Hortons is distributed across Canada in various pockets of population: Calgary, Vancouver, Montreal, Toronto, and Ontario especially. By closing down these pockets, we hope to find the source of contamination. It might be possible that we do not pinpoint this right away, or that we find more than one source of contamination. This would aggravate the effects, or the monetary impact on our recovery process that we are undergoing right now. Competitors take aggressive stance. We see that a lot in the technological world, Apple versus Microsoft. We could have that in the coffee world also, where competitors would take a stance aggressively on TV ads against us and use this crisis as leverage to promote their coffee and downplay ours. We could also have consumer lawsuits. We can think of Maple Leafs in the Listeria crisis last year, where they played the weight game and they got caught eventually. They are under lawsuits. They've settled recently. We could be unable to find new suppliers of coffee, which would force us to partner with competitors and obviously pay much more for our coffee. And we could have a second contamination center, like I mentioned first, where we again had to go through the whole process of shutting everything down. The calculation of possible losses due to the operation of shutting down the stores and basically making sure everything is clean and disinfected before we start reopening. So loss from temporarily discontinued operations. Obviously, you shut down every store, you clean them, you remove all machines from the counter that interact with coffee in order to reassure your clientele that everything is fine and everything is clean as a restaurant. So these costs, the most costly item is basically the lost business from the crisis, the impact on your brand and on people deciding to avoid Tim Hortons to go somewhere else, a McDonald's, for example, a competitor. This is obviously the biggest impact. In terms of production, shutting down the plants, cleaning everything out, having employees do nothing, basically. Again, somewhat costly. And supply of rerouting coffee to different areas in order to make sure that all your regions are supplied with coffee. So this would come up to $261 million, which is a lot of money, but compared to the brand equity that you have in Tim Hortons, it is valuable spending. Just quickly here, under previous plan, we came here prepared for a growth plan, aggressive and fun growth plan for Tim Hortons in Canada and the US. Under this plan, we would have a revenue CAGR of 16.5%. Obviously now it's going to be depressed. We put in the new hypothesis in our model, and we would come out with a CAGR of 10.6%, which is still acceptable, although underneath what you have right now and way under what we would have planned with our growth opportunities. Quickly, Canadian recommendations. So we had organic growth, catering, third-party products, lunch value menu, salads and organics, all fun products that Tim Hortons could have launched in Canada. Obviously, this is pushed back for a year. In the States, Tim Who campaign, which was very fun and intriguing, although right now we might downplay it because now's not the time to be fun. This was our big push in the United States. I'll just leave it to Adam to close off.
Thank you very much, Matt. So just to conclude, Tim Hortons must accept responsibility for the situation by being completely transparent with all of its stakeholders. We believe that in terms of the implementation, we've identified several key issues that Tim Hortons can focus on: administrative issues, legal issues, operations issues, and communications issues. We believe that the Tim Hortons growth strategy must be postponed a little bit. We had planned aggressively to target expansion both in Canada and in the United States, and as the previous two slides showed, we did have some really interesting and exciting ideas for that growth, and we'd be happy to answer questions about them in the Q&A, but as it is, we came here and we presented to you what we feel is a pretty comprehensive risk management approach to the current situation. Thank you very much. We'll now accept questions.
I have a question, and that's about your, can you hear me? Communication strategy. You say that the first thing you want to do in your strategy is built around accepting responsibility. But I wondered if you had identified a spokesperson and if you had a plan to involve your franchisees and other stakeholders. And also I saw a secondary issue, not only the contamination issue, but how you would deal with your employees given a time of increased unemployment in Canada and your integral role in the communities you serve.
Well, I think there are a lot of questions in that, so I'm going to try to retain them and respond to them accordingly. In terms of a comprehensive communications plan, I did not have the opportunity to present all the different methods that we would have employed in order to deal with it. The key areas that we did concentrate on were, in fact, the clients and the public, the employees, and the franchisees. So in terms of reassurance, for the employees, it's important to be transparent with them, to give them an understanding of what the situation entails for themselves and for the company. If possible, to reassure them that their job is not going to be at risk in the future. And given perhaps Tim Hortons' very strong brand equity within the Canadian marketplace, we also wanted to encourage the employees to perhaps speak to the community about the situation and about the actions that Tim Hortons is taking to address the situation. I do believe I might have missed part of your question.
It's okay with Laird. I just wondered how you could leverage your strengths to deal with the issue at hand through your communication strategy.
So one of Tim Hortons' key strengths is strong franchisee relations. And one of the points on the communications plan would be to offer support to the franchises by forgiving some of the fees that they would normally pay for advertising, for their rental fee, and then there was another one, I believe. So we would be communicating actively with the franchisees to work with them to help them through this particularly difficult time, because we understand that our success is based on the success of our franchisees. And just to add one more point, I think one of your first questions was, would we appoint a key spokesperson? And on the administrative plan, the very first point was to assemble a crisis management team. And so that would be a key 4 or 5 individuals from high up in the Tim Hortons organization that would be responsible for dealing with the major decisions, and one of those would be a key communications spokesperson.
Yeah, sure. So I've heard a lot of different things that you were planning on doing. Just simplify it for me and really paint me the picture of how this is going to play out in the short term. So the next 10 to 30 days, what are the things that we're going to have to do?
We'll start from an operational point of view. 10 to 30 days is close to that. As soon as we know, we should basically shut down all restaurants for a limited period of time in order to make sure that the problems have not been disseminated by the coffee. So our point is to pinpoint where the coffee has been integrated within our warehouses, within the restaurants. So that it is from an operational point of view. I'm going to address this better. I'm going to get to the communication side. So this is very, very short-term shutdown plan. Just pinpoint the source of the contamination. Make sure that you clean this out and it can get reroute coffee to where this is. Basically, coffee is the lifeblood of the company. It's 52% of all sales. We want to make sure we get blood to where people want coffee. So this operational point of view, this is it.
Well, communications would be parallel with operations. Clearly, you would want to release information about the situation right away in the form of a press release. Particularly significant stakeholders would be contacted either in person or a conference call or in other manners as appropriate to the individual. And in particular, the idea is that by informing them right away and by even getting in touch with the government right away to assess what possible assistance they might provide in this situation, any possible people that might be affected by the contamination will have the ability to seek aid immediately in case of contamination.
What type of message would we be sending to our clients? I know we talk about stakeholders. What type of message if we pulled all our TV ads, closed all our stores, closed all our plants for a period of time to find the contamination? Is there a different approach to maybe not serving coffee for a few days and still selling our other product lines and dealing with it? So creating an epidemic?
That would be the second step. The first step is basically clean up, make sure we're okay. When we pinpoint the center of contamination, our plan involves stopping all coffee sales, although we will sell everything around coffee and offer to purchasers complimentary drinks, be it juice, cola, Even ice caps, which are not real coffee, they're coffee-flavored drinks. I'm not sure how popular these will be, but so we basically offer these products around to keep the customers coming in, even though your check will be reduced, and you want to keep that loyalty going for the short term. So we'll be closing only in a very short period just to make sure that our restaurants are safe. That's the message I think we want to say and send out at first. We care, and we want you to know that we're safe now, and that this won't happen again.
Now, can I just ask you this? Tim Hortons, they operate throughout Canada, as I understand it, right? And if one of your strategies is to close the stores throughout the country, how is that going to affect the goodwill of the company? Have you considered that?
So I'll take that first, and I was going to add it to the response to the previous question, and that was the unifying message in all of the communications that will be going to all of the stakeholders is we are going to do whatever it takes to take care of you in this time of crisis. And so the reason why Tim Hortons needs to cease operations, at least in the immediate short term, is to make sure that all of the customers are being taken care of and that their health is Tim Hortons' number one priority.
The contamination is in the coffee beans, right? So, and I take it that you probably ascertain a particular region where this is more problematic than others.
Not as of yet.
Or would you not try to do that first?
Well, yes, by shutting down everything. So in our plan, we shut down everything because Canada is basically pockets of population. Canada, Calgary, Vancouver, Montreal, Toronto, Halifax. We can easily pinpoint where this is coming from. Hopefully we have one center of contamination where it can deal with it locally. All the others can reopen afterwards once we pinpoint where that is.
Sorry, I'm going to go on further here. You've got approximately 20 million customers who are going to be standing in line at Tim Hortons. When you close the stores, I can see potential riots. I don't care how you advertise it. There's no way to know. You've got to line up at any particular time of 20 cars in the parking lot, and how are you going to inform those people that you're now closed? And for 6 days, I'm not even worried about the business loss at this point. I'm worried about the safety of the staff, the safety of the franchisee, and the safety of the customers in the parking lots that are going to be going a bit crazy at this moment. This is significant. It's probably more significant than closing down the airlines in the United States after 9/11.
So it is definitely a significant concern that we've thought a lot about. And so part of the message that we had in our communications plan is not only will we communicate through TV ads, through print ads, through press releases and newspapers, but it would also be working directly with the franchisees and with the Tim Hortons staff to make sure that the appropriate message is being dispensed to all of our consumers. And so at Tim Hortons restaurants all over Canada, there would be signs going up and saying, we're closing temporarily for 5 or 6 days. We apologize. Staff won't be present at the store, and we'll be reopening as soon as possible. So hopefully that would quell the riots a little bit.
But if I may just add to that, I think the key concern here is that if we don't, in fact, cease operations until we locate the source of the problem, that there's quite possibly other people who are going to be contaminated by the coffee beans, since we don't know exactly where the source of the problem is at the moment. So the question is, if the cost of health and safety of additional people would be to close the stores in the very short term, then yes, that's the price we would be willing to pay.
So presumably, right, well, the information I have here, it says contaminated coffee beans from a major supplier. Presumably there is a way of sorting out which major supplier coffee beans are contaminated, and you separate that particular supplier's coffee beans from all the other suppliers that supposedly Tim Hortons gets their coffee beans from, and why can't you deal with it in that way?
I think it's a question of when we got the bean, when it gets roasted, and then it gets distributed to our different coffee shops. So it's an extra precaution that we need to take to ensure the security of our customers. So it's just to make sure that there isn't any batches whatsoever that might have the contaminated coffee bean.